Okay, let's be honest for a sec. Who hasn't closed their eyes and imagined, just being surrounded by peaceful woods, maybe a babbling brook somewhere nearby? It's like the ultimate daydream, right?
Okay.
But you're taking it a step further. You're actually looking into becoming a forest worker. So we're going to dive into this RoleCatcher career guide you sent over, see if we can figure out what it's really all about.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing the guide points out right away is how much people, tend to romanticize working in nature.
Oh, for sure.
But then they hit you with this almost shocking statistic. Something like almost 40% of forestry workers actually experience a work-related injury at some point. It's like, well, reality check.
Wait, 40%? That's huge. You don't always think about that when you're picturing like serene forests and all that.
Right. It really underscores how important those safety protocols are in this line of work. It's not just a walk in the park, so to speak.
Yeah, suddenly that babbling brook doesn't sound quite so peaceful anymore. So it's not all sunshine and roses. Got it. But in terms of the actual work, is it all like planting trees and, I don't know, smelling the roses? What does a day look like for a forest worker, according to this guide?
Well, the guy does a good job breaking down those tasks by experience level, which I thought was helpful.
Oh, okay. So you're not just thrown into the deep end right away.
Exactly. You might start with more of the, planting, the pruning, that kind of thing.
Makes sense.
But as you gain more expertise, it can involve things like identifying specific tree diseases.
Mm.
They even mention oak wilt, which I had to look up. Apparently, it's a huge problem for certain oak species.
See, now that's what I'm talking about. Oak wilt. I'd never even heard of that before. And it's not just about knowing a tree when you see one. It's understanding, like, the whole ecosystem and what threatens it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you might have to use some pretty serious equipment to manage those threats, too. The guide talks about the need for training on everything from chainsaws.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of a given. Chainsaws. Gotta have them.
Right. But then they mentioned, get this, tree climbing robots.
Tree climbing robots. Are we talking like Wall-E in the forest here? What even is that?
I know, right? It's amazing how technology is changing even fields that seem like super traditional, like forestry.
That is wild. So we've got potential hazards, specialized knowledge, high-tech robots. Sounds like even if you've got like the world's greenest thumb and love being outside, there's a lot more to being a forest worker than meets the eye.
100%. And this guide honestly does a fantastic job laying out those expectations, versus the kind of romanticized view that I think a lot of people have going into it.
So for someone who's heard all this and is still thinking, sign me up, where do I apply? What does the guide say about actually getting started in this field?
Well, on that front, the guide is actually surprisingly practical. Like, they really get into it.
Okay, good to know they're not just like waxing poetic about the beauty of nature the whole time.
Right. No, they really emphasize the importance of hands-on experience, even before you think about formal education or anything.
That makes sense. You can't exactly learn to handle a chainsaw from a textbook, can you?
Exactly.
So what are we talking here? Like, should I be out there volunteering at my local park or something?
See, now you're getting it. That's a perfect example. They specifically mention internships, apprenticeships, even just volunteering for like tree planting events or trail maintenance, stuff like that. The key is to just, demonstrate a genuine interest and get those practical skills building.
Okay, so basically, get your hands dirty, literally. I like it. But speaking of getting hands-on, the guide, Dee mentioned those tree climbing robots earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something you need, like, a degree in robotics for, or?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And that's actually a really interesting point that the guide brings up. So while, yeah, technology is definitely becoming more and more important in forestry,
For sure.
they really emphasize that, like, a passion for nature and the willingness to work hard, those things are still paramount.
Right, gotta actually love being out there.
Exactly. Like, they suggest that a high school diploma is usually enough to get started in those entry-level positions.
Okay.
But having some background in, I don't know, forestry or a related field, that can definitely give you an edge. They even mentioned certifications in arboriculture, which I thought was interesting.
Arboriculture, ooh, that rings a bell. But just to refresh my memory, what is that specifically?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's all about the care and maintenance of, like, individual trees,
Okay.
which makes a lot of sense in this line of work, right?
Mhm.
So you might learn about things like pruning techniques, tree identification, how to diagnose diseases, kind of like we were talking about with oak wilt earlier.
Right, right. So it's not always about like the whole forest. You could be focusing on, I don't know, preserving some historic tree in a park or even just making sure the trees lining a city street are healthy.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of standing out, the guide had this one suggestion that I thought was super innovative, creating a portfolio of your work.
Hold on, a portfolio. For working with trees, that's not something you see every day. What would you even put in a thing like that?
I know, right?
That's
Sounds a little
rude.
unusual at first, but they suggest including like before and after photos of trees you've pruned, maybe some descriptions of projects you've worked on, that kind of thing. Just a way to like really showcase your skills and dedication, you know?
So it's like a visual resume for your love of trees.
Yeah, exactly.
That is actually really clever. Shows you're going above and beyond to like learn and grow in the field. But let's say you've got the experience, you're building your portfolio, you're geeking out over oak wilt. What about the competition? I've got to imagine there are a ton of people who'd love to work in such a like beautiful and rewarding field, right?
Right. Oh, for sure. The competition could be tough. And that's actually where the guide really stresses the importance of continuous learning. Like, it's not enough to just have those basic skills when you start out. You've got to constantly be staying updated.
So new types of trees, new threats, new robots probably too.
Yeah, exactly. New forestry practices, new technologies, even emerging challenges. Like,
Mhm.
think about climate change and how that's impacting forests.
Wow. Okay, so you've really got to be adaptable, always learning, up for a challenge. That's a good way to put it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Hmm.
They actually make this great comparison in the guide. They compare it to the forest ecosystem itself, you know?
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving and adapting, and you kind of have to do the same to thrive in this field.
It really is amazing, though, when you think about it. Like this whole career path, it's this blend of, really traditional skills, working with your hands, being out in nature, but also all this cutting edge technology. You'd think maybe those things would kind of clash.
That's true.
Like someone drawn to working with trees, maybe they'd shy away from robots and stuff, but it sounds like no, you got to embrace it all.
Yeah, it really speaks to that whole adaptability thing the guide keeps emphasizing. There's another layer to that adaptability, too, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, okay, what's that?
So they talk about the importance of being able to understand, like, different perspectives within the whole field of forestry.
Okay.
Because it's not always one big happy tree family.
Right, right. Everyone's got their own opinions.
Exactly. Like they specifically mentioned that there's sometimes conflicting viewpoints of, say, conservationists versus logging companies, for example.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Finding that balance.
Right. And I think that's a really important point that they bring up because it highlights how you're not just out there working in a bubble with the trees.
Oh, right.
It's like you're part of this much larger conversation about how we manage and protect forests as a whole.
Absolutely. And how to utilize the resources they provide, too. It's complicated.
Exactly. And the guide really drives home the point that having those communication skills, being able to problem solve, see different sides of an issue, those are essential when you're navigating those kinds of complexities.
Yeah, for sure. Makes you realize there's so much more to it than just the trees themselves, you know what I mean? It's ecology, it's economics, there's even like an ethical dimension to it.
Absolutely. And honestly, that brings us back to something we touched on earlier, which is that even if, after listening to all of this, someone decides this specific career path isn't for them,
Yeah.
the skills that this guide emphasizes, they're as so valuable no matter what field you're in.
Oh, for sure. Like adaptability, problem solving, never stopping learning, those are transferable to pretty much any job these days, I would think.
100%. I mean, in a way, it's like this guide is providing a roadmap, not just for becoming a forest worker, but for like navigating the whole crazy, ever-changing world of work in general.
That's a good point. I like that. It's funny how, like, we dove into this thinking we're going to be talking about trees, which we did.
Right.
But then we're also getting all this wisdom that applies even if you spend most of your time, like me, stuck in an office. I'm even thinking about my own career journey now, like all the times I had to adapt, learn something brand new, or wrap my head around some new technology that I didn't even understand at first.
Yeah, I get it. And that willingness to evolve, it's huge EE no matter what you do. It's like
Yeah.
staying curious, being open to new possibilities, and never losing sight of, bigger picture.
Well said. This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about, that's for sure. And for everyone listening, if you're even a little bit drawn to the idea of a career working in nature, outdoors, honestly, this guide's more than just some career resource. It's like an invitation to explore a whole different way of thinking.
That's a great way to put it. It's a philosophy.
Exactly. It's about approaching your work, maybe even your life, with that same, I don't know, respect and adaptability and just like sense of wonder that you find when you're actually out in the natural world.
Beautifully said. I love that.
That's a thought worth holding on to. So, to everyone listening, as you continue to explore your own path, just remember, whether it's literally a walk in the woods or, a deep dive like this into a new field, that journey of learning and growing, it never really ends.